We have a belly button gazing doozy today. One that could end up in the self-destruction of the world. All right, so before we get into the suicidal spirit of certain kinds of literature, of abortion, and of the modern and postmodern Western mind, I want to sing to you a song from a band that I quite enjoyed in the 90s, despite its overly introspective, dare we say, toxically introspective vibes. But oh, these sour times, 'cause nobody loves me, it's true. Not like you do, ba-da-doom, and so on. Little Portishead. Oh, these sour times. Now here we have, look at that. I don't recognize that ending, but goodness gracious, she definitely listens to Portishead. You know what else she does? She reads Gothic novels. This is an article on LitHub, and it is entitled, "The Gothic Horror of a Post-Roe America, or We're All Still Locked Away in Edward Rochester's Attic." All right, this is Gwendolyn Kista. I believe that's how you say her name. The Gothic Horror of a Post-Roe America. This article is a classic example of people who must see reality through the lens of their own passion or their own work. But of course, when one is deeply individualistic and introverted, this is why it is unhealthy to just embrace being an extrovert or an introvert. Be human. Because introversion is turning in upon oneself, and this is what it leads to. It leads to Gothic horror, y'all. And I'm going to get into that, but I just want to look at this article with you. Okay. So, a decayed and graying landscape, oppressive, miserable weather, women who are in constant peril, and the men who put them there. This could easily be the back cover write-up for a classic Bronte novel. It could also describe the summer of 22 after the fall of Roe v. Wade. Again, seeing all of reality through the lens of one's work, but I sort of sympathize that, right? That's a very human thing to do. In America, our lives have become a horror story. We watched it happen slowly until it happened overnight. Now, like a character lost in the haunted house, we find ourselves trapped, and unless we can reckon with what brought us into this moment, we might never escape. First of all, this woman lives in what she describes as an abandoned farm with not enough ghosts, I believe is how she puts it. So, there's an obsession here with being haunted, and she is indeed haunted by, apparently, the cease and desist order, or at least the states get to decide order, on chopping babies into bloody little bits. You know, even if you can convince yourself that an in utero baby is not a human being, surely there is still something horrific about it. It is gory. This is why it's important that abortion protesters actually show people the results of the procedures past the point when all you get is a blood blot. Okay, but our lives have become a horror story. And we're going to see, as this article unfolds, that she has an obsession with the GOP in particular. And so, there are people who live in these bubbles, and they really think that most of the country thinks like them because most of the people around them think like them. And so then they have to assign guilt to some cabal of old white men, the GOP, instead of the harsh reality that over half of her countrymen wish for an end to abortion. All right, these existential dangers, the horrors are not new. The threat of powerful men is a theme that runs through the heart of Gothic literature. From Dracula to Heathcliff to Edward Rochester and Dorian Gray, these characters have an uncanny knack for taking possession of women's bodies. Whether it's a bite on the neck or the turn of a key in an attic, they ensure nobody ever forgets who possesses the power and who doesn't. Now, in the description of one of her novels, she describes the historical setting of her novels in contrast with a modern setting, which is such a terrible use of the word, because the historical setting is the 19th century and the 60s. Listen, there is not a more modern time than the 19th century. You could argue that almost the entire 20th century was postmodern. The 19th century, the Victorian era, was quintessentially modern. This sort of shows a historical myopia, I believe. Now, there's definitely a theme. This is relevant because there's definitely a theme in Gothic literature like she's describing, right? The helplessness of humans, but particularly the helplessness of women. Now, the helplessness of women has always been a theme, but for people who get sunshine, who get enough vitamin D, what it results in is protecting the princess, saving the princess, going to war for the princess, going to war for the peasant maiden who is kidnapped, or for the little girl who is gobbled up by a wolf, right? This is what people who get sunshine do. They respond, they fight back against. And there is a hopelessness, Van Helsing or not, she's going to talk about happy endings later, I'll address that, to Gothic literature. And it is a direct result of romantic attitudes, okay? So this starts with the Enlightenment, artistically and for cultural absorption. It starts with Blake. So this is why the Romantic poets bugged the heck out of me. Wordsworth may have gotten a good bit of sunshine out by the River Wye, but he lived in his belly button. And the sublime, unfortunately, was found in his belly button. And this led very naturally to, well, listen, if women are this weak and this vulnerable, then that is horror, because we are all of us ultimately alone. So this frightened me terribly, this idea of these characters ensuring no one ever forgets who possesses the power, the uncanny and the bite on the neck. This frightened me terribly when I was growing up. A longtime horror fan, I was always the weird kid who loved creepy movies and creepier books. But for all the monsters I was told to fear, it was the men who brooded in shadows and stalked around their decrepit mansions that petrified me the most. They seemed to be the ones who could get away with anything. Now, this woman has clearly been stuck in her navel for a long, long time. And I'm in a way amazed that she's taking a platform and taking a stand from out of that horror for more of this. Like, do you want more people to be like you? I mean, it's a terrible way to live. Fear dominates. That is how most people live. And the sacrifice of children that goes on in this country happens because of fear. In the Gothic tradition, women's bodies are often treated as disposable, a battleground for unspeakable horror. They become mysteriously ill or go inexplicably mad. Above all else, their fates and their flesh are not their own. Whose fate and whose flesh is their own? But I will grant that women are more subject. I mean, Camille Paglia is excellent on this. Women are more subject to more powers, no doubt about that. But no human ultimately has their fate or their flesh as their own. Unfortunately, these fears are not confined to fiction. In a post-Roe America, the quiet part is being said aloud every day. The quiet part being we want to dominate and rule women and take advantage of their sweet fates and their sweet flesh. With the GOP making it clear that they'll never stop legislating our wombs. For them, forced motherhood is gleefully regarded as a form of punishment. Who is regarding motherhood as a form of punishment? You feel punished. That's why you think it's punishment. And there's a profound satanic immaturity to that. For them, forced motherhood is gleefully regarded as a form of punishment, a way to correct so-called profane behavior. Surely someone out there has once referred to profane behavior. I just use the phrase satanic. Profane behavior is not a talking point. So the use of so-called there is terrible. And the editor really should have done something about that. There's nothing more threatening to them than women they don't control. Such assumptions. Ooh, maybe I do feel threatened by you. Perhaps no character from the Gothic better exemplifies the GOP. Like, why are we talking about the GOP? Talk about men. Talk about white men. Talk about half of this country. Talk about religious nuts. I mean, you can make the GOP a part of that complex, but how bizarre is it that you're funneling it down? Like, I would never, ever, ever vote Democrat. I'm not a registered Republican, and I know a lot of people like that. The Republicans don't represent me, but I am at the forefront of trying to stop you from cutting up little babies. Perhaps no character from the Gothic better exemplifies the GOP's dangerous woman than Lucy Westenra in Dracula. She's an inveterate flirt who openly laments that she can't marry 3 suitors at once. She laughs and cavorts for the norms of her time, acts like a man, like someone whose freedom is inviolable. Okay, this brings up an important part of this. Once the Romantic, and subsequently, Gothic as a subset of that, mentality takes hold. Like, once we buy into the Enlightenment, once we buy into Descartes, then we are all of us simply beings burdened by flesh, beings who perhaps live in a simulation, Kant later going on to try to develop that in a less silly fashion, but remaining just as silly. And that means that we are all of us evaluated in the same way, which means that when these books were written, and as this woman is sort of seeing it, women became deficient men. And that's what led to the feminist crisis. Women were deficient men. But that's not how Christian society had been. And many other societies actually managed to not be that way as well. But we insisted on seeing the world as everyone as an individual and a being. Their body is an accident in the philosophical sense. And so you have a woman's body that makes you inferior to a man. It makes you a deficient man, is what I should say. Now, there has been a revolt, and so now what's happening is that men are being judged as deficient women, right? Women who are not as good at the important things in life. Women who are given to vices like wanting to provide, like wanting to protect. All right. There's a sweet immorality about her that only adds to her charm. Consequently, Lucy is marked for death from the start. This is the horror film trope. After all, why should any wanton woman expect a happy ending? Lucy isn't the only Gothic character to meet an untimely demise. After being jilted by the title character, Sybil Vane in The Picture of Dorian Gray swallows poison in Wuthering Heights. Catherine simply fades away and dies for no clear reason. The Padme Amidala of Gothic literature. Oh, goodness. Yeah. I guess maybe we're trying to connect with the people here, but that was a fatally low-brow misstep. Yes, I am going there. Padme Amidala. Goodness gracious. I mean, that's trash. The stuff that you enjoy from the Victorian era, from the Gothic movement, is also trash. But it has some acceptance among some people as belonging among the greats, belonging in the canon. Surely, to cite anything outside the original trilogy is a grave misstep. So yeah, I'm playing the snob card. After all, I'm speaking to a woman who writes for Lit Hub. All right. Famously described by her husband as intemperate and unchaste, Bertha Antoinetta Mason from Jane Eyre succumbs to a fiery death. Together, these women become casualties, or causalities. I believe she means casualties. Let me ponder this. Punished for loving too freely or simply loving the wrong man. I believe she means casualties, not causalities. The horror genre is rife with these moralistic dichotomies. By now, we all immediately... I love how she sounds like an English 101 undergrad course. By now, we all immediately recognize the final girl in slasher films, the character who makes smart, respectable choices and therefore gets to live. And this is a real thing, but this is a direct inheritance from the Gothic, romantic, and modernist mindset I was describing to you. This is absolutely, she has observed a trope. The character who makes smart, respectable choices and therefore gets to live. We also intuitively recognize the penultimate girl, the final girl's lascivious friend, who makes it through most of the film, only to perish before the final reel. Think Tatum from Scream. The logic is apparent. There are women who deserve to thrive, a great use of a contemporarily fashionable word, and women who don't. The Supreme Court is expecting us to respect this distinction, the distinction between the whore and the virgin, apparently, right? The slut and the nun. The Supreme Court is expecting us to respect this distinction, to treat it as a self-evident truth. And there are plenty of women in America who do consider this narrative to be the only one. Okay, finally a concession that there is something outside the GOP that is threatening her. Act appropriately as a woman, the argument goes, and you'll be fine. Step out of line, however, and you'll lose everything in an instant. Well, there is a sense in which those who believe in some sort of good and some sort of evil do believe that for men and women, acting appropriately generally leads to good. And if it doesn't, it's because of the interference of some evil. This is not something that's especially for the sluts and the nuns. Okay, this is a sad little portion here. There's a particular scene in Jane Eyre that's fascinated me ever since I was a 12-year-old kid watching the Joan Fontaine film on Saturday afternoon television with my dad. Ironic, oh man, this is totally out of school, but I do wonder how she gets along with her dad. Ironically, it's a scene we never experienced firsthand, namely the climactic fire that destroys Thornfield Hall. It happens while Jane is away, so we learn only fragments about it. Still, if the servant's account is to be believed, Edward Rochester plays the Byronic hero right up until the end. And I love the myopia, the literary and historical myopia of pretty much everyone in Western letters these days. Right? To be a scholar who knows about Beowulf or Chaucer, even Shakespeare, is almost to be a historian at this point. Serious literature stops at the Romantics for most of these people. And so the Byronic hero, and there actually is something of the Byronic hero in this character, but the Romantic movement is the Gothic movement. Like it's just one big stream. All right. With his precious estate going down in flames, Rochester races up the burning stairs and manages to get to the smoldering roof where Bertha is waiting. Sorry, the name Bertha always makes me laugh. He reaches out for her, ostensibly to guide his burdensome wife back down to safety. And how does she react to this? Okay, and this is where this mentality that she has is a civilizational suicide. Okay? She wants freedom by killing, and if necessary, killing oneself. This is why it is so easy for her to call for the freedom of killing babies, because she is about to argue that suicide itself is freedom. So how does she react to her husband? Without hesitating, Bertha opts to leap into oblivion. Important choice of words. Not leap to her death. Leap into oblivion. Suicide, for those who romanticize it, is a way to forget. I was going to say obliviate, but that's just using the same word. A little oublier action. Really just to blot out memory. Memory is our lives. Memory is our identity. Memory is our being. And suicide, she directly connects this to the mind and to memory. This is why you commit suicide, in order to have sweet, sweet oblivion, erasure, rather than to accept the help of the man who imprisoned her. It's perhaps the most telling moment in the entire book. She takes the only way out she can fathom. Well, that's true. And it may be true more broadly. The only way out she can fathom, instead of spending one more day locked away from the world. In a society with no good choices, she makes the one that frees her from him. With such a mindset, to have a character who does make a good choice. Maybe the good choice of joining the Croatian immigrants on the very southern tip of South America and becoming a fisherwife could have been a good choice. Of course, there are strictures in society. Ultimately, though, what we're talking about is a lack of courage. And the lack of courage is what leads to the leap to oblivion. Something about this scene reminds me of the GOP lawmakers and anti-choice activists who evangelize about how abortion is, in fact, bad for women. Why are you saying in fact? There's just really just bad writing happening here. Their argument is the same as it's been for decades. Their song and dance is old as disco. That is subtly and well done. It is suggesting that they have only been this unreasonable and wicked since Roe v. Wade, when in fact theirs is the novel wickedness for our society. Their argument is the same as it's been for decades. Their song and dance is old as disco, that having autonomy over one's uterus isn't good for us or for society at large. This is an old abortion trope, so I'm not going to get into it at all, except to say this, which is no one says you shouldn't have autonomy over your uterus. People are saying you shouldn't have absolute life and death sovereignty over another human. That human happens to be in your uterus. You can practically write their dialogue for them. You could have written what I just said, for example. Yet every time they're quoted in a news article or seen beaming on camera at a protest, I see Edward Rochester on a burning roof, reaching out for the wife he drove to the brink, promising her that he offers the best possible prison. But this so-called madwoman is wise to his tricks. Okay, so what are you calling for? What are you advocating for? Are you asking people to suicide? To leap to oblivion? Surely not. Surely there is a good choice. This appears to be, to you, a society with no good choices. There must be a good choice. And of course, she is going to have a call to action. But man, the suicide in this thing, the self-obliviating, is horrific. Other than their tragic deaths, these aforementioned Gothic women have something else in common. They're all sophisticated. You knew it would. You knew. You knew it was going to go here. Of course you knew. My wife's watching me from over there. They're all cisgendered and they're all straight. With the exception of Bertha, who's described as Creole in Jane Eyre, they're also all white. Okay, all the talking points. Excellent. This is something that many modern readers will notice immediately. Again, like, did no one teach you? Maybe they don't teach this. I'm discovering that the current generation doesn't know Roman numerals. So I guess I'm just coming late to the party. But that's not what the word modern means. Modern does not mean contemporary. This is something that many modern readers will notice immediately, the obvious exclusion of anyone besides the privileged few. Again, and then she begins to sense that she sounds ridiculous. But a lack of diversity is hardly limited to Victorian literature. I mean, it's supposed to be a society novel set in Britain. So I guess the thing to do now is to shoehorn in characters that don't seem like they belong at all. But they hadn't reached that point of enlightenment back then. In the immediate wake of Roe's demise, strange fault lines developed in dubious corners of the internet, with some commentators taking the opportunity to gatekeep who is and isn't allowed to call themselves a woman, or even who's permitted to express their fears for their own wombs, depending on their gender. Okay, and this is intersectionalism, right? I mean, no one can write an article that doesn't talk about all the things. Okay, so apparently some people in corners. So they're in dubious corners. I don't know how you gatekeep from a dubious corner. But I suppose I don't have the mentality that when someone says something that hurts, that would be hurtful to me if they had power over me, that I should be hurt, right? They live way over there, and they have no influence over me. And in fact, I have just said that they are in some dubious corner. Apparently, we need to have 100% consensus, and no one can ever say anything threatening against you, or it's gatekeeping. I really don't know how you gatekeep from a corner, though. Man. Okay, so who's permitted to express their fears for their own wombs, depending on their gender? All the things. These arguments are chilling. In particular, when you realize they dovetail with an oft-quoted line from Justice Samuel Alito's Dobbs opinion. That is, see, these things that she hasn't quoted, she hasn't cited, she's just saying. There are some people in dubious corners, and what they say dovetails. I mean, just so many bizarre usages of English. That is, that certain rights aren't deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. By this rationale, if something hasn't always been accepted, then it never should be. The way we've historically discussed reproductive rights hasn't taken into account many of the issue's nuances. I guess we're taking a little Second Amendment tack on this. In the past, feminist dialogue has often lacked intersectionality, excluding women of color and members of the LGBTQ plus community who are frequently at higher risk. But that doesn't mean these conversations have to stay like that forever. Yeah, I mean, we don't have to stay in the Victorian era when people did not know to shoehorn in a Polynesian and an Asian and a black character into Northern England. On the contrary, the current moments give us an opportunity to be more inclusive in a way our classic literature simply isn't. There you go. After all, just because something isn't deeply rooted in tradition shouldn't stop us from seeing the humanity in all of us and the ways that so many people's rights are being rapidly stripped away. Here in America, Thornfield is currently on fire. We need to stick together if we're going to survive the flames. Okay, here she said something really interesting about happy endings. And apparently this is what the godless belly button gazer thinks a happy ending is. Despite all odds, there are many happy endings in Gothic literature, and there are not. That's a defining feature. Dracula is dispatched by a Texan. Dorian Gray destroys his own portrait. Jane Eyre settles into the family life she always craved. Even Heathcliff and Catherine's ghosts are seen together in the end, while Catherine's daughter at last finds true love. Okay, do those sound, most of those, like happy endings? Let's go back to horror films, right? An inheritance that we have from Gothic literature. One of the things that makes a horror film as opposed to a thriller or a oh goodness, the genre is escaping me. But, a thriller or just a good film in which people die, any sort of drama, a horror film, it's not the gore and it's not the adrenaline and the jump scares. It is the implacable horror of the ending, in which the best possible outcome is survival. That's what makes a movie truly a horror movie. Is that even if there's survival, it's not a happy ending. The horror remains. There's still an implacability. Cthulhu is horror because there is no overcoming the old gods. There is simply surviving or hoping that they don't notice you or they don't come during your lifetime. That's horrific. It's in that world. She lives in a Lovecraftian world, and our society is in a Lovecraftian world. And we think that survival, making it to the end of the story that someone else is reading, even though we're going to stay alive, is somehow a happy ending. It's just survival. Dorian Gray destroys his own portrait. That's actually sad. I mean, the whole story is sad. It is better that he destroys his portrait. But that's a story with no good exits. Horrible things have happened, and horror results. It's sad. Heathcliff and Catherine's ghosts are seen together in the end. I mean, do I have to say more? Like, living together as ghosts? How is that a happy ending? Even Dracula, I mean, the implacability of a vampire universe. Dracula being killed did not relieve the horror. Well, it relieved it. It did not banish it. I will let you decide whether Catherine's daughter at last finding true love constitutes happiness. So if even the grimmest corner of classic literature can give some of its characters a fighting chance, does that mean we can still earn a happy ending too? And if so, what's the path forward from this moment? It's hard to say, of course. We've already lost our way, and the world is only getting darker. Oh, for the light of being able to chop up babies. But if nothing else, I take comfort in Mina from Dracula. Despite immense loss, she does what Van Helsing and the others failed to do. Okay. Imagine a world where you call for individual sovereignty for all humans, including women. Women don't need a man. Certainly, women don't need to be identified for the excellent assistance that they provide to men. And then she says, she does what Van Helsing and the others failed to do. She pieces together their journals and helps to unravel the mystery of Dracula. So you're telling me that Van Helsing finds success because a woman helped him. Excellent. Good job, woman. All right. In a turn of genius and empathy. Feminine power. I love Mayani. Mina wisely realizes that working together is the only chance we've got. Okay, and this is her call to action. Let's work together to chop babies up. But not everything from the Gothic is quite so comforting. I mean, this blows me away, that anything in a Gothic belly-button-gazing world could be seen as comforting. I mean, this is the comfort that people take in the thought of oblivion and suicide. Bertha's fate in Jane Eyre poses a painful question. Can we burn down the landscape that oppresses us without immolating ourselves in the process? Is there a way to emerge from this with our rights, our bodies, and our spirits intact? Or has the fire of Thornfield already spread too far? Basically what she's asking is, should we leap to oblivion? She is posing, without saying it explicitly, the hit behind this. Not very far. Has the fire of Thornfield already spread too far? Because if it has, we apparently are left with only one option. We can't let the GOP hold our hands. Leap to oblivion. I wish I knew the answer. I wish I could offer some solace at once to others and to myself. But this moment is fraught and uncertain. Right now, we're desperately navigating that dim and dingy attic in Thornfield, trying to regain our bearings, wanting to believe it's not too late. But like the men of Gothic literature, the GOP won't make it easy. I mean, this thing with the GOP, goodness. The odds are stacked in their favor, and no matter what we do, they'll keep rising over and over. Like a vampire! But here's the truth, so will we. Maybe that's what keeps us reading the Gothic. Yeah, there's a reason that trash literature is held in esteem. The West is suicidal. The reminder that despite the darkest moments, there is still a way out and this world is still worth fighting for. The story isn't over, not by a long shot, and we don't know our ending yet. Maybe we won't have to leap to oblivion. But thanks to more than a century of Gothic tales, if we must burn it all to the ground, at least we won't be the first to try. Excellent. Okay, so it is oblivion, but what she's saying is you don't have to jump off the veranda yourself. You can push our society off of it. Just set the whole thing on fire. Gwendolyn kissed, y'all. Excellent stuff. Okay, well, that was an invigorating little rant for me. I hope you were able to stick all the way through. I appreciate you being here. I'd love to hear your comments. Do any of you actually like this trash? Not the trash that she's spouting, of course, but Gothic stuff. Or do you dare to like the Romantic poets? I would love to take issue with you. Take issue with me down in the comments below. The peace of Christ be upon you.
What day is it today? Remind me.
It's Sunday, Mr. Pinch.
Sunday. And what do we do on a Sunday morning, wherever we happen to be? We go to church, you bloody heathen!